Welcome back to Nutrition Science Bites. With World Menopause Awareness Day upon us, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could ask on behalf of women all those questions that women ask? So who better than to invite back into the studio Dr. Rebecca Haslam. Now, Rebecca has a private practice, Nutrient Nation, and I know that she sees a lot of women who are going through menopause, but also Rebecca's a research scientist, a dietitian, accredited practicing dietitian, and she also works here at the University of Newcastle in exercise and sports science. And she's also done lots of work for sports dietitians and for New South Wales Institute of Sport and the Hunter Academy of Sport. So welcome back.
Thanks, Claire. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this topic is just not going away. And it seems to me that people are talking about it all the time, whereas, like even half a generation ago, it was silent. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just so much more awareness around menopause now. More women are realizing that the symptoms that they're experiencing are actually associated to perimenopause or postmenopause. And I think as well with the addition of social media and some really big influencers that do have expertise within this space, sort of pushing those messages out there. I think we've just got so much more awareness of what's happening now.
Yeah. So can you take us through the different stages of menopause? Because I think unless you've transitioned through it, or maybe even if you are transitioning through it, you still don't understand that there are distinct stages. So what are they again?
Yeah, definitely. So menopause, that's an interesting one because I think that term's often widely used to encompass the whole menopause transition from perimenopause to postmenopause. But the definition of menopause is actually a single time point which reflects 12 months or 12 consecutive months since the last period. And then so this is the point at which the female hormones and particularly estrogen are at their lowest. So that's the female sex hormone, estrogen. And we typically see menopause occurring on average around 51 years of age.
So is that 51 years of age the start of menopause, or you mean post-menopause?
Yes, so that's essentially the point that marks the end of perimenopause and the start of postmenopause.
Right, okay, all
Yeah.
right. So and how long does that perimenopause or that transitional phase last?
hmm So perimenopause is really sort of that 4 to 6 year period in the lead up to perimenopause. And this is where women experience a lot of those different symptoms because it's the fluctuations in hormones across this period that lead to a lot of those symptoms. So that's sort of the lead up period. We're hearing about symptoms like brain fog, low energy and constant fatigue, changes in body composition, hot flashes, joint pain, all of these different symptoms that we now know are linked to perimenopause. And then, of course, postmenopause, as the name suggests, is the point in time or the period of time past what we define as menopause.
Yeah, and I'm gonna answer this question for you, Beck, just based on experience, is that, because we talk about it a lot more and, you can actually get special leave, menopause leave. I was gonna ask you, were women suffering in silence? But I'm gonna tell you that we actually were. And I certainly remember myself going, like, just all menstrual cramping and stuff going, "This is awful. I feel like I'm a teenager again." So I think, in fact, because it wasn't talked about, women really were suffering in silence and you're made to feel weird even though it's a normal life phase.
Yeah, and I think a lot of women just assumed that it was them that was experiencing that and weren't actually realizing that there's other women feeling the same way of them. And it was sort of a private matter. So it probably wasn't as normal some time ago to be talking about as openly as what we do now.
Yeah, so yay for actually discussing it, and that's why we're here today. So when we focus then on the nutrition challenges and
Mhm.
nutrition issues that are common as women go through menopause, are there key sort of aspects to be aware of?
Definitely. And I think, women are very aware of this, very aware of the symptoms that they experience. But in my experience, they're less aware of the health consequences of these changes across this period. So when we see estrogen declining, we see a decrease in bone density. We also see an increase in fat accumulation around the midsection. So these changes increase our risk of osteoporosis, heart disease, and diabetes. So I think some education around these health consequences, as well as the dietary strategies to overcome that, is really important.
Yeah, so, great. The reward for surviving all those earlier years and now, like you said, diabetes, heart disease, and osteoporosis. But um, last year I talked to Professor Lauren Williams, whose PhD was actually on menopause. And one of the things that struck with me from when she did her research, and that I know other women have said have been helpful, is that you're better to know and to do something about it. Otherwise, you tend to sort of blame yourself. Oh, what did I do? And whereas now you can go, oh, you darn life stage. But, if you're armed with the right information, at least we can fight back.
Definitely. I think it helps women to know that there's a reason behind what
Yeah.
they're experiencing.
Yeah. Now, Beck, I'm now going to fire off a whole bunch of questions, which, we've actually, just so you know, everyone, we actually have pre-worked these out because Beck approached me saying, you wouldn't believe the huge number of questions and issues. I thought, let's just fire them off. Okay, so common questions that women ask you as clients about menopausal transition that relate to nutrition. Number one, why can't I lose weight, Dr. Beck?
Yeah, absolutely. This is by far the number one question that I get asked from women in this life stage. And I guess a good place to start is why women feel like they're gaining weight across this period of time. So, again, the decline in estrogen that we see across this period of time essentially leads to a greater accumulation of fat around the midsection, as I mentioned before. And for a lot of women, this can feel like it's sort of making their clothes a little bit tighter. We might see an overall increase in total body fat as well. And so women are just feeling like they're gaining weight across this period. And the things that they used to do before with their diet and exercise perhaps aren't working as well as what we used to. But we know that from some of the data, and if we refer to the Australian longitudinal study of women's health, we know that when they've looked at women in this life stage, there's some women who do gain weight. So the data shows around 4 in 10 women do gain weight across this period at a rate of around half a kilo per year across that perimenopause stage. So across 5 years, we're talking about a gain of around 2.5 kilos. I guess the main thing that I wanted to
Yeah,
point
so
out,
it's
yeah.
Yeah, Bex, I was just going to say, so it's really common and it's not in your head. And I think what's frustrating for women is that if they've never had an issue with weight gain
Mm.
and then now it's just happening, but they don't feel like they've done anything, but, those darn hormones are at play.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said 4 in 10 women and the average menopausal weight gain collectively are average around 2.5 kilos. So that
Yes.
means half people, it's going to be more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some people don't gain weight or much weight, others gain more than that. And so it's important for us to consider, all right, what are the things contributing to that in those who do experience weight gain? But I like to point out as well that even from a nutrition point of view, if we're looking at a half a kilo weight gain per year, in theory, if we're looking to restrict calories to offset that, it's not a big change that's required. But when you sit down and talk to women about what's happening for them, the lack of sleep, the low energy levels, the low motivation to exercise, the desire to eat more sweet foods, or the lack of energy to prepare healthy meals at home, while the changes that they need to offset half a kilo are quite small, they don't feel like they have the physical or mental capacity for that.
Yeah. And it's actually, a life stage where for the majority of women, you've probably, or maybe not so much these days, exited those teenagers or young adults from your house and feel like you should be able to put your feet up and enjoy some more treats or rests. But also it is a life stage where many women take on carer responsibilities, for like aging parents. But so on to question number two. Okay, so we get this is, nature's issue for us, reward for us is that we're now more susceptible to weight gain, and particularly around our waist. So question number two, how do you reduce abdominal or waist fat tissue?
Yeah. So if we talk about weight in general as well as the visceral fat, I think referring to some of the research that's been done in this space, around 10 years ago, but also more recently, we're seeing that it's individualized support along with ongoing support that's tailored to the individual, to their preferences, to their lifestyle, that's most effective at helping women to actually achieve their weight loss goals. And there has to be some form of calorie or energy deficit.
I can just hear women going, okay, just tell me, tell me, tell me. What is that individualized support? What is it that you advise women specifically when they come to see you
Mhm.
as an accredited practicing dietitian and they want to address this issue of midlife weight gain?
Absolutely. Step number one is doing a dietary assessment for the individual. So, determining where the areas for improvement are for them. So, naturally, we're going to be looking at putting women into an energy deficit. So, where in their diet can I modify that? So, the types of things that we're going to be doing, we're going to increase low energy density foods. So, things like fruits and vegetables are going to increase. We're going to limit our intake of processed junk foods, takeaway foods, and alcohol because they're also very energy dense and contribute to an energy surplus very easily and also don't have any health benefits for them. So they're probably going to be a couple of the key things we focus on, but also trying to prepare some healthy homemade meals so that that gives them the opportunity to be eating healthy right across the week and lowers the chance that they're going to be purchasing takeaway on their way home from work.
Okay, Dr. Beck, I have to just jump in there and remind women there are so many resources in No Money, No Time that are going to help them with that. And one of the key things that we've seen from users of No Money, No Time is that when you prepare some of those healthy recipes, it's not about cooking every day. Some of those will last you 2 to 3 meals. We did do a little survey. 3 is the maximum number of times you can eat the same thing in a week. So you've got to put it in the freezer. But definitely trying to do that on the days where you do feel more energetic will mean when you're exhausted, you can just zap something out of the microwave. But the other thing, Beck, I agree with you about, like doing that assessment. I think, we're so busy. How often do you get to the end of the day and you go, what did I eat or drink today? And as soon as you keep a food record, you go, oh, actually, I didn't have 1 glass of wine, or that glass is bigger than what I was thinking. So it really does increase your awareness of not only what, but when. So we'll put a link to the diary, and it's a food mood diaries that helps you tap into
Mhm.
sometimes you're eating because you're tired or drinking coffee because you're tired. So that'll help people, but recognizing there's also phone apps.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, Claire, that's what the research suggests is that women also need sort of that ongoing accountability and reflection on what they're doing. So a once-off assessment or advice from a dietitian or from anyone else is probably not going to be enough to get those long-term benefits. Women need ongoing support. They're telling us that they want peer support. So they want to be doing these things with other women at the same
Right.
time. So they want to feel supported at the same time as they're going through sort of this weight loss process.
And Beck, would you say that most women are doing the support side through like the physical activity side?
Yeah, particularly in the research, I guess they're also doing it from a nutrition education point of view. So it's group education that they're coming
Yeah.
together. They get to sort of hear about the education side of things, but also talk about their own experiences. But yes, from an exercise point of view, it's a lot easier to join group activities. There's plenty of walking and running groups that are out there now. We know that there's gyms that sort of have a particular focus on females. So I think there's a lot of resources that are available to women to help them get the support they're after.
Yeah, and the resource I'll plug again is with No Money, No Time. We actually do have a closed Facebook group. So for Menopause Week, we'll particularly highlight and,
Mhm.
maybe you'd like to jump in to and answer any questions if they come up at that time.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question. Why am I always tired?
Yeah. I think this is a big one. And for me, what I see in practice, and even some of the research has shown that the second top symptom that women experience going through this life stage is low physical and mental energy. So it's not uncommon that this is a very popular question that's being asked by individuals. And again, it's happening because of these fluctuations in hormones that are then impacting sleep. Sleep's then impacting what people choose to eat. It's also impacting their motivation and energy levels to train. So it's sort of a revolving cycle as to why they're in this place. But I guess one of the strategies that I focus on a lot with women who ask this question is trying to get them to almost stabilize their blood sugar levels. So really it's coming down to them just eating regularly across the day. So not having a teeny tiny breakfast, which we see a lot of women do when they first get up in the morning, having a really balanced meal for lunch that includes some long-lasting carbohydrates like brown rice or sweet potato or quinoa, rather than skimping on breakfast, just having a tuna salad for lunch, and then finding that their energy levels drop mid-afternoon because they haven't fueled well enough to start the day off.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, like, I know personally, if I have rolled oats in my breakfast, it's sometimes I go, wow, I can't believe it's lunch already because I think it's those whole oats. And I definitely notice more so than if you have the quick oats that are already chopped up. And Beck, there's a product that I saw at found at the supermarket, which is quick cook ancient grains. And there you have to go rummaging. They are in the health food section. But I found these when I was looking for products that don't contain any additives. And so I've been using that as the base of a grainy salad and then
Mhm.
putting everything on the top. And I agree. Now, I've got an analogy for you. Okay, so complex carbohydrates are like the fuel your body runs at. You've told us it's ideal to keep that supply of that complex carbohydrate to keep your blood sugar pretty steady. So our hormones put us on the roller coaster. Do these complex carbs, to me, is that like doing our seatbelt up low and very tight so that at least in the roller coaster we're not like flopping around and at least we've got a steady fuel supply and can keep that going in without the fuel, getting all sloshed around wood. Is that a good enough
It
analogy?
is not one that I've heard before, but I love it. Yes. So essentially, it's keeping the blood sugar levels in a very sort of straight line and not allowing things to just fly all over the place like they're on a roller coaster and not strapped in.
Yeah, well, I think for many women, Rebecca, that's actually going to be news because if you go on a whole bunch of different types of social media sites, they're all going, "Oh no, evil carbs! Don't eat any carbs." But this is the key thing that we are telling women, and I honestly, I don't think anyone really realizes the power of complex carbohydrates. Vitamin E, which is a really powerful antioxidant nutrient that mops up those free radicals that contribute to aging and cell damage and chronic disease, but also particularly the breads, and go for the whole grain breads. They're an important source of folate and iodine that you need for thyroid and for your hemoglobin. So, yay, we can eat carbs again so long as they're complex.
Absolutely. And even fiber. I think women don't realize that fiber is part of carbohydrate food. So if they're eliminating carbohydrates, they're also eliminating fiber, which we know that we need for good gastrointestinal.
Oh, yeah. Constipation. And then, some of the research that we're focusing on here now is the metabolites that get produced in your colon when your microbiome latches onto the fiber. And that can also affect mental health. Okay, but we've got to move on because there's 10 questions. So, how much protein do you need during the menopausal transition? And is that different from premenopause?
Yeah, protein is a hot topic at the moment. It's definitely having its moment in the sun, if that's the word we
Yes,
use.
it is. I agree.
And not just in menopause. And look, there's things about that that I like, but I think the main thing that women need to be mindful of is that it's very focused on protein alone, which can sidetrack women and almost make them forget that there's other things that they need to be focusing on as well. So yes, protein's important, but it is not the be all and end all. So, when we look at protein requirements across this life stage, unfortunately, there's not a lot of research or data on it. But if we look at Australian population data and we're referring to the recommended dietary intake, only 1% of Australians don't meet the protein requirements. If we're
Oh, hardly
talking
anyone.
about Hardly anyone. And that's at the level of the 0.75 grams per kilogram per day. But I guess what a lot of the claims are sort of spruiking now is perhaps women going through menopause because of the changes in body composition, the benefits to appetite, satiety, perhaps they actually need a higher amount of protein. So the limited research that is out there is still a little bit conflicting, but those positive studies show that perhaps an intake around 1 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day is going to be more ideal for that satiety effect, so keeping full after meals, and then perhaps also 1.6 grams per kilo for maintaining muscle mass. But again, there's other studies that show that just meeting the RDI or the recommended dietary intake is sufficient. So I think a lot of the research or the references in this space come from one particular position stand on protein. And there's actually very little that's been done in menopause, women going through menopause specifically. And I think that's the key here, is that there's just limited research in this population.
And it seems to me, Beck, that it's actually pretty hard to know how much protein you have unless you keep a food record. So you either do the food record or use one of the apps. I always plug Easy Diet Diary because people don't realize the apps differ in what country nutrient database is powering it. And it uses the Australian database, the same one that we use in our national nutrition surveys. Okay, so it sounds like protein may be an individualized thing, but people can be reassured protein deficiency is extremely rare. So let's move on to the next one. So can phytoestrogens help with hot flushes? And I'm going to say hot flushes. In America, they say hot flashes, and I like flushes better. And are phyto are phytoestrogens safe? But first up, what actually are they?
Mm.
That is a topic you do hear in association with menopause.
Yeah, so phytoestrogens are a plant derived substance that has estrogen like properties. So I guess it's proposed that if we're low in estrogen and we consume these phytoestrogens, which are typically in plant based and soy based products like soybeans, tofu, some vegetables, flax seeds, that if we consume these, we can almost replace the estrogen that we're lacking, that's declining across this menopause transition. So that's sort of where a lot of this comes from to begin with. There was some early research done that showed that women in Asian countries who have quite a higher intake of phytoestrogen or soy-based foods had lower rates of hot flushes or hot flashes. But the main sort of distinguishing factor there is that there's a lot to do with our gut microbiome that actually helps the phytoestrogens kind of convert into their active form. And those particular metabolites are higher in our Asian countries compared to Australia, for example. So we don't actually see, in research done here, we don't actually see the same effect that phytoestrogens can improve hot flushes.
So it suggests to me, Beck, that if you want to try that, then you should also put in place there the really high plant-based diet that people have in Asian countries, and they do have that steady supply of complex carbohydrate, and they do have a steady supply of carbohydrate from rice as well. So likely that's all contributing to their microbiome. Okay, so
Absolutely. And there
that's
are
something people could try though.
Yeah, definitely. And there's concerns from some women that phytoestrogens can contribute to breast cancer risk. So there's always been a little bit of caution around including too higher doses. I think, research has sort of shown now that that's not the case, but I think it's always better to err on the side of caution in that from food sources, it's unlikely we're going to overdo it with phytoestrogens. But it's when we start looking at supplement sources of phytoestrogens that we start getting doses that, we probably don't want.
Yeah, and the other key thing, Beck, is that when you have these active compounds packaged up with the food, you get the dietary fibers, you get the other active compounds. So, soybeans, soy milk, tofu, would they be the key ones? Those three are certainly easy to purchase at the supermarket.
Yeah, absolutely. And then your nuts and seeds, particularly flax seeds, are an easy one just to add to cereals or to smoothies.
Great. Or even overnight oats. I think we got
Yes.
3 recipes for those on No Money, No Time. Okay, so I think that's timely to sort of then to mention like the soy milks because next question, what about calcium and our bones at menopause? If you hate dairy, should you be taking a calcium supplement or should you be just taking one anyway?
Yeah. Well, calcium supplements are going to be processed differently in the body to foods. And as you said about the phytoestrogens, again, the main thing that we're looking for from the food is all the extra nutrients that you also get. So it's preferred to get calcium from food sources. And as you mentioned, our key sources are going to be our dairy foods, so our milk, yogurt, and cheese. We know some women prefer not to, or if they're lactose intolerant, for example, don't want to be having a lot of dairy products. So they might switch to a calcium alternative or a dairy alternative, such as soy or almond milk. The main thing that we say that women need to be mindful of there is that these alternative milks have been fortified with calcium. So, a good source of calcium in dairy based sources provides around 2 to 300 milligrams of calcium per serve. So, if the plant based alternative is not providing that amount of calcium, it's not a good alternative to dairy. So, we need to find a different option.
Yeah, and again, Beck, I think this is another nutrient where if women are keeping that food diary, they can check how many milligrams of calcium, and it's the life stage where your calcium requirements go up to try and help counter that bone loss associated with menopause. But I think too, like in the plant-based milks, they do vary in the calcium. So here's a strategy, but women should just do this. Pick one week when they're not rushed. If you go to the long life milk section at the supermarket, you can then compare the calcium content of cow milk and all the plant-based milks pretty easy. You can just turn all of the products around and have a look and select one where the calcium is similar to the dairy-based milk so that if you're going to try one of the other milks, you're still getting an adequate calcium intake. But I think that is like we said with protein and dietary fiber, really, there's some nutrients you really want to look at. Okay, so next question.
I was just going to add to that, Claire, just around sort of the supplements again. And I guess the reason for supplementing, if we can't get adequate calcium from food alone, is that looking at the rates of decline in bone health for women across this period, late perimenopause, we're looking at declines of 1 to 2%. But by the time we get to post-menopause, bone density can decline by sort of 10 to 20% in that first 5 years. So while we
Well,
want to promote food first, I think our priority is maintaining bone health across this period of time. So we know that rates of osteoporosis, again, by the time we reach 75 years of age, the prevalence is around 25% in Australia.
yeah,
So if we need supplements after an individualised consult, I would be prescribing supplements if I've covered all other bases and can't get
yeah.
enough from food.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you really want to protect your bone density. You don't want to fracture your hip, do you? And then that's not going to be fun retirement. But what about vitamin D, given that, you need the calcium and the vitamin D? And it seems to me that it's pretty common to be vitamin D deficient if you're doing the slip, slop, slap. So frustrating, isn't it? All these things. You do that and then, oh, great, now I'm vitamin D deficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we're hearing about it more and more that women, and particularly again in this life stage, are vitamin D deficient, but we need vitamin D to help absorb the calcium. So the two go hand in hand. If we lack vitamin D, even if we're getting sufficient calcium, maybe the body's just not absorbing it. So even just a few minutes of sort of sunlight earlier in the day before we sort of hit that peak sun period in the middle of the day can be enough. But I guess across winter, we probably also see vitamin D levels decline.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's a good one to follow up with the GP, given that there are blood tests for vitamin D. Okay, next question. What about all of those other supplements that are bombarding us? Magnesium, creatine, collagen. What to do about them?
Yes, and that's a very big question that we could probably
Mm,
talk about for a long period of time.
might have to get
Mag
you back.
Yes, exactly. Look, I guess the first point that I want to make, I think women need to be very mindful of supplements that are being promoted to them, just in general, but across this life stage. We know that women are searching for any way to overcome these symptoms. So, key messages can be a little predatory sometimes. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. But when it comes to magnesium, I think that's a funny one because while a lot of women anecdotally report that it helps with their sleep quality and quantity, the research doesn't really align with that, particularly if we're looking at magnesium supplementation. I think the main thing is that research would show that if women have an adequate intake from their diet, and we know that we need around 320 micrograms per day, if we get adequate magnesium from food alone, we get sufficient sleep duration and quality. So I think there's not any real need for us to be focusing on magnesium supplements, which are probably putting us quite beyond that daily target.
Yeah, and Beck, it's really important to realize, like we did a podcast on this, is that added into the magnesium supplements is vitamin B6 because it helps with absorption. But they add 1 month's supply. And because even though theoretically you should be able to urinate out the B6, you actually can't. You can't clear 1 month's supply when you're taking it every day. And there's case reports now and warnings about peripheral neuropathy, so pins and
Mhm.
needles in your fingers. So food first when it comes to magnesium, especially I didn't know that about the study saying they don't really improve sleep.
Mm, yep.
And, I did also ask you about creatine and collagen. So what to do about all these supplements being pushed on women?
Yeah, and creatine, look, particularly in the space of sport, when we're talking about lean mass, when we're talking about strength, there's a lot of evidence to support creatine, and there's more coming out around the cognitive benefits and potential benefits around sleep as well. But there's been very little done in menopausal women. So, how do we know what the ideal dose is, the ideal duration is for taking these supplements? Again, 3 or 4 studies on a particular topic is not enough for us to then know in practice what advice should I be giving to my clients. And that's not to say that it's not a well researched supplement, that there's very few side effects. But again, without doing the research in this population specifically, how do we know if there's no longer term side effects or immediate side effects that come within this specific population?
Would that be one where if you go, "Right, well, I'm gonna take it," it'd be worth maybe working with your dietitian to see or at least documenting what your sleep then is and what your muscle strength is perhaps? Yes, I'm aware of it as having potential benefits for sports people. So, it sounds like you need to evaluate it in the context of also your sports performance. Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in addition to that, one of the main side effects that we see is that not women, men and women in general can retain more fluid in the early phases of starting creatine. So there wouldn't be many women that were too happy with that side effect.
Oh,
So
great. Yeah. Yeah. So you're trying to reduce your abdominal adiposity and now you're getting bloating. It's so complicated, isn't it? So am I right in guessing that collagen's kind of the same when you're talking about menopause?
yeah, yeah. And, the theory behind it is collagen declines as we age. So if we supplement with it, then perhaps we can prevent that decline in collagen. So we have better skin and hair and tendons and bones and all of these wonderful sort of benefits. But again, while there's probably few downsides to that, and again, in practice, that's not to say I'm not having these conversations with people to potentially be trialing them. But for a blanket sort of message to a whole population, I don't know how much I should be recommending to you. I know the guides or the ranges, but again, it could be very individual.
I've got two pieces of information that I think might help women in making their decision. First of all, have a look and see where the collagen came from, because it comes from like all of the offal. It can be bone, it can be hide, cowhide, it can be skin, pig skin, it can be fish like fish scales. It's all the bits that you can't sell, like for meat, or all those extra bits. So have a think about that. If you've got a seafood allergy, you really want to make sure it's not a marine source. And there's actually 2 systematic reviews that I looked at recently, and one is all of the trials, and they go, great, improves elasticity, hydration. I thought, wow, that sounds great. And then the other systematic review looks at only trials that are not funded by the industries, and there's no effect when you remove the industry-funded trial. So I think it's one of those cases of buyer beware. Okay, but we've got to move on. So the next question, when it comes to dieting strategies, you know, should women do a fast? Should they do a detox? Um, yeah, should they do intermittent fasting? You know, again, recognize horses for courses. What would you say about those approaches?
Yeah, we touched on carbs, cutting out carbs a little bit before, and we know that we're also then cutting out vital nutrients. So again, that's typically a no. Might be reduce carbohydrates and make it a tailored carbohydrate amount to suit an individual's activity levels. Yes, absolutely. The reason women perhaps like following these types of diets, cutting out carbs, doing a detox, potentially fasting, put them into an energy deficit. So if their goal is weight loss, then typically they're probably going to see some benefits of that. But it doesn't mean that these methods are more superior than other diets. It's just that it's put them into an energy deficit. And sometimes when you do a detox or you do fasting, you're cutting out a lot of the foods, like the processed foods, the high sugar, high salt foods, the low fiber foods. So you naturally feel better as well. But it's not from the diet, it's from what you've cut out while you've been following this new sort of way of eating. So I think there's a lot of key messaging around this. Fasting's probably the biggest one in the menopause space at the moment. Yeah, there's a lot of claims or a lot of messaging about women needing to fast across this period, and different types of fasting. Maybe we do the 5-2, which is 2 days of 500 calories a day. The other 5 days you eat normally. Maybe it's alternate day fasting. So there's lots of different methods.
Can I just say, Beck, there's a big difference between an intermittent fast and, the 5-2 is the most common, or the alternative day, compared to the, products off the shelf and drink this bright coloured solution and don't eat basically anything else. People report nausea and really feeling unwell because they're basically having almost zero on those detox days. Whereas there is a lot of research, isn't there, around the intermittent fasting. But what I find fascinating about that research is that, so you have 2 days where you only, you go hard basically 2 days a week, and you end up with the same average reduction in total energy as you would as if you were taking the tortoise approach. But whether you're the tortoise or the hare, you can still meet your nutrients from those approaches, but you need the support to do it. So I think it doesn't really matter, again, horses for courses. But I think, Beck, the key thing about all of those, like fasting approaches or the more standard approach to, just reducing your kilojoules every day, is getting that support and then getting the help when you want to change to something else. Whereas my observation is that people try one approach and they go, oh, well, that didn't work. So therefore, every approach to trying to reduce your energy intake doesn't work. But I feel sad for people when they just haven't had the right support or found what's right for them.
Yeah. And we see with different fasting protocols, I guess, the 5-2, some women love. Some women hate the 5-2 and would prefer alternate day fasting. And again, it comes down to what suits them as an individual. But as you said, if they're not getting the education around, one, how to follow these properly in the first place, or what alternates there are if something isn't working for them, that can make it really, really difficult and frustrating. But again, I think we need to stop looking for quick fixes as well. And I think that's very common in the weight loss space, is that we want results now. And once we get those results, we don't then follow on and look at maintenance strategies for the longer term.
Yes, and I know that your PhD was on maintenance of lost weight, so you've got the perfect expertise in that space. So, Beck, the other thing that I was just going to touch on in that fasting category is the 16-8 diet. This is just, and really, this is a practical strategy for women of basically just eating in an 8-hour window, whereas most Australians have a very long eating window that has increased from the days when you had to light the fire to cook the dinner, all that kind of stuff. So, that's why I think a food diary can be so helpful for people to then go, oh, look at that. I'm still eating at 10 o'clock at night, and then people being more aware of it, because I think a lot of that night eating is often invisible,
Mhm.
happens in the lounge or in front of the telly, and then people go, who ate that? You go, whoops. Oh, that was me. Whereas like closing the kitchen, shutting down the kitchen, you actually can, it's a pretty easy change to make. Just having a cup of tea or a coffee made on milk, or even if it's soy milk, rather than,
Um,
decaffeinated, so you don't,
yes.
anyway. Okay, so
Yeah.
next question is, so what are the indicators when women, when you say to women, you really need to talk to your GP about that aspect?
Yeah, I like to take a preventative or a proactive approach. So typically from the early 40s, I'm probably recommending that women at least have an annual checkup anyway. So having a screen for blood, so blood sugars, cholesterol levels, potentially iron, vitamin D. So sort of a lot of these markers that we might see become abnormal across this period of time. So let's get ahead of it early. So I think any time from sort of the early 40s a good time to add some sort of regular checkups in there. If there's any family history, diabetes, heart disease, bowel cancer, osteoporosis, can also be a good reason for us to be having check-ins with our GP to make sure that we're not sort of heading down the same path. But of course, if women are feeling like they're trying everything or they're not managing their symptoms as well as they would like to, check in with the GP. And we know now that there's menopause consults that women can get with their GPs in that sort of 45 to 49-year age category, who can then do an assessment, collect the relevant information, but then send women off and refer them on to the right people who can help them with whatever they're experiencing themselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's really great. And just a reminder for those busy GPs out there that that's not a short appointment. Yeah, that women will need to book a long consult so they've got the time to go through all of those issues. Well, we've covered heaps, but there's one last question. Is there is there any other key things that you would say to women who are perimenopausal, going through the menopausal transition, or postmenopausal when it comes to nutrition for this life stage?
Yeah, look, I think we've covered a lot today, but a couple of key points, I guess, just to summarize. As I mentioned, be proactive. You're probably going to need to take charge of your own health. So if you want to see some changes, make that first book in with your GP and start looking at your sort of long-term health. So future-proof now to save yourself down the track. And then just be mindful, I would say, of all of the key messaging that's out there around menopause at the
Yeah.
moment. There's still a lot of misinformation out there. So learn where the evidence based information is and focus on that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give, dietitians a plug and say, don't forget to ask your GP for referral to a dietitian, or just check your health insurance. It might already be included in there. Sometimes you don't realize what's in your package.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for such a wide-ranging talk about nutrition and menopause, Dr. Rebecca Haslam.
Thanks for having me, Claire.